Hey, Dan here in one of my favorite spots in Valencia, Spain. But don't worry if you're getting bored with the scenery. I will be back in Prague very soon. Now, today's video is continuing the series on philosophy for ENFPs, INFPs, and anyone else who really wants to listen. And the philosophy we're going to explore in today's video is one of the first I ever came across back in university in a philosophy class that, I'll be honest, I ignored a lot of it, but some really stuck with me, and that's where this first one comes in. Now, just a quick note, if you're new to the idea of reading philosophy or thinking about philosophy as a way to understand life, there is no one philosophy that is the way to live. Now, of course, many philosophies try to be this way, right? That's kind of actually the point of philosophy, is to figure out a unified thought around how society works, how we should live, what is the right way to be. But if you read more than one philosophy, you realize, hey, there are many different arguments of how we should be, and they tend to vary a lot by, I'm going to attempt to sit down here, by culture, by timing. So, for instance, when in history a philosophy was popular. So, for example, you have very different ways of thinking in, say, the Roman times, which often would be about duty and purpose and some of these types of topics, than you might have in times where they maybe lean to a little more of a hedonistic philosophy or approach in life. And this makes sense. You also find that different philosophies become popular at different times. Stoicism is having a reboot over the last at least couple decades. And you might also notice that there's patterns of who loves certain philosophies based on their personality types. So, for instance, Stoicism, which I mentioned, and we'll do another full video on, is advocated by quite a few people, including someone like Tim Ferriss, who is an INTJ. Kind of makes sense that an INTJ would be all about a very rational, non-emotional approach to living and how to be, right? But we're not INTJs here on this channel, not at all. And that is why we're going through what philosophies might be great for us. Today's is utilitarianism. Now, utilitarianism is best explained by the way, this camera is way heavier than my phone. So if you see me struggling here, it's because I guess I have not been doing enough shoulder workouts. So utilitarianism is essentially what action leads to the greatest amount of happiness for the greatest amount of people, but in a proportional sense. So, for instance, if one person can have a happiness of 100, and that means 10 people lose 1 happiness point each, that is best for the overall good. More good has been done overall from this person getting 100 happiness points than good has been removed from the system by 10 people losing 1 happiness point each, right? Makes sense? I love this philosophy. I apply it almost on a daily basis when I'm thinking about things I should make, and I'm honestly really surprised when I meet people who aren't about this philosophy and do the opposite. So there are people who would say, I don't want to lose 1 point of happiness so someone else can have 100. No, doesn't make sense to me, right? These might be libertarians, actually, in a way, if you think about it. Although there's other reasons for libertarianism in terms of freedom and everything else. But it's basically what is doing the overall good. And in a way, although I don't think it's usually discussed in this sense, there's a little bit of that Eastern aspect of oneness. If we are all the same, if all people are connected, if Mother Nature and all beings, if we're all one, then utilitarianism should be the way to go. Because if I do harm to you, I'm doing harm to myself. If you have more happiness, I have more happiness. And therefore, why would I want to have a little bit extra happiness for myself when you could have a lot of extra happiness? Now, how does this practically play out? Well, think of this example. Imagine you have a giant New York pizza, 8 slices, right? And you eat the first 7 of them. For someone like me with a big appetite, you eat the first 7 slices of pizza. Now, question here is, who will get more good, happiness, enjoyment from that last slice of pizza? You, or someone who hasn't had any pizza yet, or someone who's starving? Well, we all know the answer to that, right? That last slice isn't very good. You're usually already feeling too stuffed. You You don't really want it, but you eat it. Where someone who has had no pizza, that one slice is amazing, right? And that's kind of the core of how I apply utilitarianism in a way. And I also think of, if something's going to benefit me, will it harm others? And if it will harm others, will it harm them less than it benefits me? In other words, it's okay to gain from an interaction with someone else. We're not here to try to be self-sacrificing and say, I don't want to gain anything in life. But you have to think, am I gaining more than these people are losing? Or is it an interaction like can often happen? Like say you, I don't know, choose to work for a tobacco company where you're like, hey, I'm gaining some money. Maybe because I work for Big Tobacco, I earn $10,000 more a year than I would if I worked at a place with some kind of moral compass. But is that extra $10,000 you're earning every year, is that equal to all the harm, damage, and unhappiness that your job is ultimately creating? Probably not. I mean, that's quite a big calculation to work out. But you can see how we can think about this, right? Now, specifically, utilitarianism, I think of it from an individual perspective. It is, of course, something that can be applied to societies. And at times, it can be used to justify, let's say, government policies that I would not agree with. The dictators love the whole for the greater good. Yeah, this part of the population is going to suffer massively, but it's for the greater good of everyone, right? People love that. I mean, dictators love that. People really don't love that. On the other hand, too, it can, in theory, justify a lot of, say, communist approaches to things, where you're saying, you know, this is for the greater good. Yeah, we're going to kill the educated. Yeah, we're going to kill the farmers. But in theory, it's for the greater good. Now, as most communist countries have discovered, well, all really, when you do that, you actually hurt everyone. Because when you kill the best farmers because they have the money, then everyone starves to death. So this is part of the thing with utilitarianism, is you have to do these calculations, and they're not necessarily calculations we're equipped with as normal people, or as anyone really, as governments have proven when they've made many, many wrong choices. How do you know what is the greatest good for the greatest number of people? How do you actually figure this out? And you can't. So I think it's more of just trying to do what feels right in your heart and trying to think about those things, right? You can apply it even on like some basic examples. So let's say a close friend is having a party and you're last minute you feel like, I don't really know if I want to go. Now, what is true for most ENFPs and INFPs is when you feel down and like you shouldn't go out, you actually should go out and you'll start feeling better. But let's put that aside. Let's say that something else, you know, you really don't want to go because you have some work to catch up on. Well, then you have to ask the question, are you gaining more finishing that work than your friend is losing from you not being at their party, and you're losing from your friend being less happy with you for not being there at their party? And you might want to think about this, like, is this a party with 50 people and this is a highly extroverted friend who like doesn't really care if you show up? Or is this a really close friend who's maybe a bit more introverted and only has 4 or 5 people coming, and you not going they might take as quite a hurtful thing? And so if you don't go, you gain 10 points of benefit because you maybe get your work done, but they lose 20, 30, 40 points of how bad they feel. Then it makes sense to self-sacrifice, right? And on the same note, for those who've fallen into the pattern of being avoiding confrontation, of maybe self-sacrificing too much, you want to start asking your question like, hey, how much am I losing from what I am doing for this other person? And start to think about things in that way. I love utilitarianism as part of my personal philosophy. At some point, I will share what is currently my own philosophy of how I've put together a few different ways of thinking, but I will say utilitarianism has always been part of it. Partly because I care about people, and I do feel like we are all connected, and partly I just hate waste. Like the idea that to make $10, a company would do $100 of damage to the environment dumping crap in the river is ridiculous to me. It just doesn't make sense. Like, for me to save 5 minutes of my time to make someone else spend 2 hours of their time, doesn't really make sense, right? There's a lot of these things that just feel wasteful and unfair. And arguably at a core, that's the way you can think of utilitarianism for yourself, is like an aspect of fairness and what is the most efficient and least wasteful for society as a whole. Whether it's on intellectual talent, emotional well-being, actual economics and goods, it's like, what is actually going to be the best for everyone involved? And that to me is a way I've thought for a long time, and it even in some way underwrites my whole philosophy with my coaching. A huge part of my coaching and what I do is helping people figure out who they are, what their strengths are, what their talents are, and what they can be really great at. And it's usually not that hard because most of the time people actually know, but they just don't know because it's been easy for them their whole lives. They haven't actually acknowledged it, or it's too scary to admit out loud. Like sometimes I'll say to a client, hey, what about this? And I can see their entire face change because they've known that's what they've wanted to do for a decade, but they never thought anyone else would believe in them, or they never thought it's something they could do. And the minute I say it, they're just like, their whole face lights up. Part of my thinking with that is, on a personal level, it is so important to me to empower people and see people overcome fear and actually do what's really important to them and what they'll love. But also on a societal level, I think about how much are we losing when a potential great artist is working in some crappy job and not painting? How much are we losing when someone who could be an amazing coach, doctor, engineer, whatever, is working another job they hate and only at 10% of their capacity? I think we can all agree that if someone is doing what they love and what they're naturally great at, they produce so much more than when they're just clocking in and putting in the hours and just trying to get by. And so when we empower people to do what they're actually meant to be doing, not only are they going to be happier, less stressed, probably have better family lives, better social lives, live longer, absolutely, for sure. Nothing stops your life like the daily dread and stress and hate of going to a place you don't want to be at. But society as a whole benefits. Think about it. When you go into a restaurant and you have that waiter who just loves what they do, they light up and they're smiley and great, your day is better too. Everyone is better. And that, to an aspect, I think my whole thinking about that was influenced by understanding utilitarianism and thinking, how do we all benefit the most? And for me, one of those reasons is when we all are more confident, we believe in ourselves, and we do what we're meant to be doing and have that courage. I'm just looking at myself in the selfie part of the camera here, and I'm like, I look really haggard. I'm not. I had a great sleep. I think it's the cloudy lighting or whatever. All right, I'm going off to write. I am going to finish this book by the end of this month. I've been making so much progress. So you'll see an announcement soon with the new book for pre-sales, and there'll be a brief edits and stuff like that, but I'm really happy how things are going. I've been reading my drafts as I go, and I think you're going to love this book. Something like 5 to 10% of you are going to hate this book because maybe 5%, because I put myself out there, let's just say, in terms of personality, stories, etc. But for those who love me or like me or can at least stand me, I think you're going to absolutely love this book, and I can't wait to share it with you. All right, that's it for me. Gonna go write. See you next week for the next video.